Good afternoon, or good morning even. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. أهلا وسهلا في قمة الإعلام العربي. I'm delighted to be moderating this conversation with Piers Morgan. My name is Mina Al-Uraibi, Editor-in-Chief of The National. Piers is a media personality. Those of us who lived in the UK knew him quite closely for many years, would follow his writings. He started in print journalism, went on to TV, did quite a bit of TV, radio, and now, of course, is a YouTube star with Piers Morgan Uncensored. You have much to talk about in terms of your career, but we want to talk straight into the hot topics.
I mean, you're forgetting my career highlight, just to be clear. By the way, good afternoon, everybody. Good morning. The career highlight was when I was a judge on America's Got Talent and used to judge piano-playing pigs. I would not like that to be forgotten. So that was one of my highlights, and terrible singers and a lot of other acts. So that was the thing you're missing in my CV.
There you go. The most important, perhaps, note is how actually a global audience, and certainly an American audience, really got to know a different side of you. So, Piers, in our part of the world, a lot of people have paid attention to what you say and what you're doing because of the terrible, terrible war in Gaza. And you've had very strong views, but you've also given a platform. How did you find yourself at the heart of the global conversation on Gaza?
I would say two words. Bassem Youssef, actually, who I know has spoken at this event before. When the war started, we were having a lot of very fiery debates with people from both sides coming on. And I think it's when Bassem came on and he did this extraordinary half-hour interview, which was kind of darkly comedic in the way he presented it, but making very powerful points. And it got 22 million people watched it on the YouTube channel that we had. And we realized then that this was going to be, a massive story for us, and that people were coming to us in big numbers to hear both sides of this debate as it was raging. I then went to Los Angeles and interviewed Bassem again in the Comedy Store, which is where he's performed in LA, for 2 hours this time. And he took me on a big, long history lesson, frankly, about the whole conflict for 75 years, obviously from his perspective, but it was incredibly enlightening to me. And we formed a good friendship and a bond. He's been on again since. But for some reason, my show Uncensored became a fulcrum for the big debates. Yes. And I was unafraid to put people on. I mean, I've had a lot of people in the Arab world criticize me for being too pro-Israeli. I would take issue with that. What I would say is I've always had more Palestinian supportive guests on than probably any show in the world of the kind that I do. And I think I did that very deliberately. But there's no doubt that my own view, which was from the start that Israel had a fundamental right and duty to defend itself after that horrific attack on October the 7th, my question from the start was always, what is a proportionate response? And to me, what has been happening in recent weeks and months, especially since this blockade, but also the ferocious bombardments of the last few weeks in particular, to me has crossed a line. And I'm not alone. There are now 2 former Israeli prime ministers who are condemning what Israel is doing as war crimes, calling it genocide openly, and saying it has to stop. So, I think that, yes, my position has evolved and moved, but I'm definitely not overly defensive about the position I took early on. I've always tried to be firm but fair, have both sides on, moderate passionate, heated debate, and try and get to some solution.
Because to your point about your position and how it's moved, you said, when facts change, my opinion changes. Yeah. And you're bold enough to say, actually, that was my position, this is my position now. Did the facts change, or do you feel more informed now on not only Palestine, but the wider region?
I've had a lot of people come up to me in Dubai since I've been here saying, well, finally, you're right. And it's okay. I understand why people here might think that. I don't see it quite the same way. I don't think it's my job to take sides necessarily in any of these stories. My job is to be a journalist and to hold everybody accountable and to try and get to the truth, try and establish what the facts are. I think facts should be sacred. We live in a very strange world where people talk about my truth. I've never understood what that means. I remember Meghan Markle talking about my truth on Oprah Winfrey, which turned out to be a pack of old whoppers from where I was sitting. But but my truth, what does that mean? It just means your interpretation of facts skews away to something that's not factual, but you decide it's what your truth is. You can't have your own truth. There is the truth. Now, getting the facts in Gaza has been incredibly difficult for journalists, primarily because Israel's refused to let international journalists in there. And that is a complete disgrace. And I've been calling them out for months about that. It is ridiculous that Israel has the ability to prevent the world's journalists getting in there to establish whether what Israel is saying it's doing is actually what it's doing. And I think the fact they won't let journalists in is extremely telling and very damning. So I think, my firm message to Prime Minister Netanyahu, let the journalists in. They keep pretending it's because of our safety. Please, we're not stupid. Let the international journalists in, and then we can work out whether what Israel's saying, the government is saying, is correct. And my suspicion is it's not.
And in the meantime, Palestinian journalists have been doing a heroic job, and we have colleagues that are there. And to be able to try to get the truth out, as you said, there are facts on the ground, and to verify those facts is incumbent on all of us as journalists to make sure that we're verifying what we put out there, but we don't stop telling that story, even if journalists are not allowed in. I want to ask you about that, the importance of facts and news gathering, because we do live in an era where actually very well-known personalities are out, discussing, talking heads, giving opinions and so forth. But you still need the facts and the news gathering. So how does the media industry tackle that? Because people are more interested in hearing opinions, often their own opinions. How do you still protect and resource the news gathering part?
I think it's a good question. Look, I think you can't under-resource the business of journalism. You've got to invest in journalism, You've got to believe in it passionately. But you've also got to believe in people's rights to have opinions. We've gone through a very strange phase. I mean, in a country like mine, the UK, for example, the idea you can't express your honestly held opinion without what's been happening recently, where people are being put in prison for stuff they put on Facebook. I mean, it's completely ridiculous. It's the most brazen assault on free speech that is imaginable in a country like mine. In America, it has the First Amendment protection, but you saw in the last 4 or 5 years this woke culture, which I find very sort of odd in its hypocrisy, because if you ask woke people who identify as woke what they really hate, they say fascism, and yet actually the way they behave is fascist. They want to tell people how to think, how to behave, what to wear, what movies they can like, what historical figures they can celebrate, and so on. Well, that is actually a form of fascism. So I think that there's been a lot of hypocrisy which has silenced people's right to opinions and free speech. And I just, for me, facts should be sacred. We should all agree on basic facts. Then you can have any opinion you like. I mean, you should be free to express your honestly held opinion.
But what if those opinions incite to violence? Because that's the line,
that
right?
isn't protected even by the First Amendment.
Yeah.
If you say stuff that actually incites violence, then... Well, there was an interesting case in the UK recently where we had these riots up in the north of England after a particularly heinous attack on with 3 young girls being killed. And it was despicable and horrific and all of those things. But there was a woman who had just put on social media, you should go and burn the lot of them as far as I'm concerned, whatever. Horrible thing to say, completely indefensible, obviously an incitement to violence, but she regretted it very quickly, deleted the post, expressed remorse for what she'd said she was acting in a very intemperate moment when she was feeling very emotional, and she had actually lost a child herself and felt this very deeply. Everyone did in the country. Now, she's serving a 2-year prison sentence for that. And I just think, again, in a country like the UK, that seems to me a baffling infringement of someone's basic rights to express opinions, even if you don't like them.
I mean, you've been a newspaper editor and previously, and traditional media used to have ways to stop. If somebody was going to write an opinion piece that actually called for the burning of others, it would be stopped by the editor. But now, everyone's a publisher. Not everyone's a journalist, but everyone's a publisher. You can start, and to your point, you can have... So how do you handle that? Because you're right, you're calling for free speech, and I don't think anybody would be against it, but at the same time, not everyone's going to be responsible, and there isn't that second tier of an editor or a sub-editor that will say, actually, no, we can't do that. Even on live TV, there used to be these controls. There's less of that now, which has democratized information, but at the same time, has really opened up all sorts of very troubling avenues.
Well, the biggest problem is fake news, and fake news is getting smarter and smarter. AI is being used by nefarious forces to create genuinely fake news. I mean, I see stuff that's me talking, and it is me, and it is my voice, and I'm saying the complete opposite things to what I've actually ever said. And it's someone's done it on AI, flicked it around social media, and before I know it, I'm having to defend. I mean, someone did one where I was supporting guns in America. Well, anyone who's followed my career knows that I campaigned vociferously against the gun culture in America, against the gun violence. So I watched that, and it was actually terrifying. It was me, and it was me talking, and someone had taken selective quotes from other interviews I'd done, and they packaged it up as me defending, guns. And I just looked at that and thought, wow, if it's that good now, what's it going to be like in 5 years? So the big challenge for the media is how do you deal with that? How do we tackle that collectively? And that's where the credibility of individual journalists becomes really important. It really is important to invest in journalists who are not partisan, do not take a side, who want to have all thoughts and opinions aired, who want to challenge everybody. That is the point of a journalist. So it's fine that you have all these people on the internet who want to call themselves journalists. That's fine, but the actual journalists who've been trained to be journalists, who understand where the line is, who understand fact from fiction, who can see fake news from a mile away, they're the people who are going to become increasingly important. Because without that, then I really do fear about the information flow to the public. And already we know that, most young people get their information from TikTok.
Right.
A lot of TikTok is nonsense. I'm addicted myself to reels with lions. I don't know why, but I watch them all day long. Completely addicted. I've got 2 cats, and they're like mini lions. And when you watch lions in their natural habitat, they behave like my cats. And if my cats, I don't let them out. So, I'm like anybody. I'm addicted to these things.
Yeah.
But if you're addicted to sites or accounts that are pumping out fake news, that becomes really damaging to a society.
And so how society is informed, and one, on that point, is it just up to the journalists, or do you expect government intervention? What do we do to quell disinformation, but also back to the point of the inciting to hatred? Because you're right in pushing back and saying, okay, we have to be careful of really harsh sentences, but at the same time, if you don't have intervention, you do get into a place where the polarization is being fed. And again, as you said, the algorithm starts reading that you're watching these deepfake videos, so they're sending you more and more, or on particular issues to entice.
Well, I had a run-in with Elon Musk, actually, who I think is a genius, but he cancelled an interview that I had planned with him because I criticized him, quite mildly, but I criticized his decision to bring back a guy called Alex Jones to X. Now, when he originally bought X, he banned this guy, Alex Jones. Now, I've got a bit of history with Jones, because when I was campaigning against the gun violence in America, he launched a petition to have me deported from America that was signed by, I think, 150,000 people. And it was on the White House petition sign. And in the end, it was interesting. Barack Obama was president, and he actually saved me. He said that I was entitled under my First Amendment rights, as someone living in America at the time, to comment about the Second Amendment. And this enraged Alex Jones. It also enraged people back in the UK, because there was a rival petition to stop me being allowed to come back, started by somebody in Birmingham. So it was an unsettling time. But I think that, the bottom line with this fake news thing, journalists have got to go after it aggressively. But at the same time, do you want to have governments locking everybody up for intemperate, emotional tweets? I think that in a place like the UK, where I've spent most of my life, I feel uncomfortable about that. And I think that, yes, you've got to target fake news. Yes, we've got to hold people to account. Yes, you've got to try and regulate it sensibly. But you've got to be careful about just how far that goes. Real journalists have to do their jobs. I think there's too many journalists becoming increasingly partisan. I see it a lot in America with the Trump story. In the first 4 years, so many mainstream media journalists were unashamedly anti-Trump. That's not their job to be anti-Trump. Their job is to tell the news, keep it straight, be non-partisan. And, I used to work at CNN, and I couldn't believe how non-partisan a lot of them became, or how partisan they became. That's not their job, to take sides, or to be seen to obviously take sides. And I think it's happening again with Trump Mark II. I saw a speech by Scott Pelley, one of the CBS anchors in America, very famous journalist, and he was ranting away about Trump. And I was like, this is not your job to rant away about the President of the United States in such a partisan way. So I think that, again, journalists have to be careful. If you want credibility, don't look like you're taking sides.
But you often court controversy, and is that because
I love controversy.
You do. Is that because you want more people to pay attention to what you're saying?
Yes. I'm an amazing journalist. I want people to watch my stuff. Isn't that shocking? I like controversy, but I don't like stirring it up on fake premises.
Right.
This may horrify you, but I actually believe the things I say. Even when I'm ranting about vegan sausage rolls, which, by the way, are awful things and have more salt calorie in them than a McDonald's hamburger. So I rest my case. But yeah, I believe the things I say and I express them forthrightly. Yeah. But I also say, when people say you're really controversial, I'm always like, well, hang on. What are these really controversial views? One of my incredibly controversial views was that I don't think biological men should compete in women's sport. Does anybody in this room think that's controversial? No. So actually, I don't think I'm that controversial. Yeah. I think I'm the voice of common sense, and I say what most people are thinking. Yeah. Always remember, on social media, only 20% of people are on X in the world. Mm. Of those, 10% make 80% of the noise, and they skew to the extremities on both sides. So you're getting a wall of extreme noise, which makes people, especially people in like politics and government, so they panic. They see stuff trending on X and they think that must be what people are thinking. Often it's the complete opposite. X has been wrong about apps on Twitter before about everything. They thought Hillary Clinton was going to win. They thought Biden was going to, Kamala Harris was going to win.
You can't put all of X into one basket.
Mostly Twitter/X has been wrong. In other words, it is not a representation of what most people are thinking.
So where do you find that representation?
When I'm accused of being controversial for thinking it's wrong about the transport issue, I just laugh. I just think I'm not the controversial one. It's the people who think women's sports rights should be traduced in the way they were being. They're the controversial ones.
So where do you find today how the vast majority of people are thinking? What platform do you use?
I look in the mirror and say, what do you think, Piers? No, because I think I am a person of common sense. I don't think I have extreme views about anything. I think I come from a very, nice, ordinary background in the south of England. I think I have pretty common sense views about most things. I don't want to encourage extremist thoughts on any side, that you get it on the right, you get it on the left. And I think that most of my views, I can't really think of any views I express which are that controversial. Can you? Can you think of one?
We only have 47 seconds, so we'll have to have this conversation later.
I'll give you 30 seconds.
I think, but I have, okay, 3 quick questions for you before we wrap up. Linear TV, can it continue to exist in the world that we live in?
Well, it'll drip on, but no. I mean, look, I've got 4 kids, but my 3 sons are 31, 27, 24. None of them watch linear television. So it's a generational shift. It's a bit like when music went from vinyl to digital. So no, I think in 10 years' time, there'll be very little linear television. And there's a generation coming that watches everything through YouTube. 12% of American television watchers now watch television through the YouTube app on their smart TV. Only 19% watch cable. And the average age of cable news viewers in America is now 70. So if you do those maths, you can see that where the trajectory is going. YouTube is the dominant force, and it's how all people under 35 consume most of their content.
So my second question before we wrap up, what is your advice to journalists here or industry executives on how they think about the future of media? What should they be paying attention to?
I think you've got to do what I do. Just look at what young people are doing. Young people will always show you the future. And you either put your head in the sand and you hold your ears and pretend they're not doing it, or you look at what they're doing and you realize that's where you need to take your business. So many people in what they call the legacy media now are still stuck in the dark ages, thinking, of course there's going to be linear television, of course there'll be print newspapers, all of these things. And actually, I love print newspapers. When I'm in England, I get 6 every morning. I love the slap on my doorstep. But the reality is, no people under 35 read print newspapers. Everything is digital. Everything's on their phone. Everything's on their laptop. Go with the program, people, and the program is dictated by young people who are showing you every day how they consume their content. That's where your business needs to be.
And finally, you haven't come to the UAE since 2009. This is your first visit back.
Well, actually, I came in 2008 and did a documentary about Dubai in which I said it was the most exciting, thriving place in the world. And it was a brilliant documentary. Unfortunately, it only came out in the middle of the financial crash when the complete opposite was then happening in Dubai. And I remember the guy who bought the UK on the world, and he was full of all his plans for how it was going to be the greatest thing ever. And then he ended up going to prison for 3 years, but after running into debt. Although I did hear, and maybe somebody here can come and find me and confirm this story, I did hear he recently bought the UK back, which, if that is true, is a perfect illustration of the arc of Dubai's fortunes since I've last been here, which is massive high, and then that, and then, I mean, I cannot believe, I have to say, the scale of what is going on here, the scale of evolution, transformation, the excitement, the dynamism, the energy. And I felt it when I went to Saudi earlier this year. I went to Qatar to the state dinner for Donald Trump. I felt it there. I've really felt it in Dubai. I cannot believe the scale of what's happening. It's very contagious. It's very exciting. I think you're an extraordinarily progressive place now, where so many of my friends now live here, apart from anything else. The moment I did an Instagram post up, I got bombarded with people, obviously wanting a free meal, but also just excited to be here, excited to live here, growing their businesses. I think you should be very proud of what you've achieved in Dubai. It's doing great.
Dubai
I thought that would get the biggest clap.
Well, Dubai is great. We took a small detour when you were airing your documentary, and then we're on our way forcefully and formally.
I think I always remember. I think the most inspiring story about Dubai was when I was going up a rickety cage out on the Burj Khalifa before it was finished, and I'm scared of heights, and I was going up, and I was getting more and more like, whoa, I'm going into space here, and I was then told the story of how your ruler Sheikh Mohammed had basically resisted all plans for this building until it got to 40% higher than the current highest building in the world. And at that point, he went, now we'll do it. I love that ambition. That is the kind of ambition I want in my country. We're not getting it, I have to say, but I want that scale of ambition everywhere. You want to have people running countries who have that ambition, who want to be 40% better and bigger and higher than everywhere else.
Thank you. On that note, thank you very much, Piers.
My pleasure.
Thank you for your
Thanks for having
attention.
me. Thank you.